All right, so we're back and we've completed the layout, the graphic compositional layout. And as you can see here, this is a pretty symmetrical, balanced grid that we've created with some diagonals that we can create some repetition. We can have some variation going on here. We'll try to think about how to create a rhythm and also how to really be exploring this positive and negative space that we might be creating here. So how might we do that? So the next step would be to take this two-dimensional page, really start to transform it three-dimensionally by cutting it. And so by doing that, obviously we have to understand the implications of what cutting will do to this paper. So if we decide to cut on these lines that we've created, so these lines represent different shapes and different planes of this piece of paper. If we cut exactly on the line, then that would just end up making an opening. So we actually have to think about if we're cutting and folding, what the leftover space might be. So if we cut on that line and fold it up, we cut on this line and fold it up, by, all the way around, then we would just have one big opening here. So that could be something you want to do. But I think one of the things I might be interested in is not creating massive openings, but to actually create a series of smaller openings in this case. And you could even potentially subdivide this even more, right? But just to give an example of how we might do that, can start to make some cuts into this and see what that does for us. And so for me, I'm just going to make some guidelines that will help me cut them out. And again, I think that could be a helpful thing for you. So say, for instance, we were going to start over in this corner. I might just roughly sketch in, and I'm going to try to do this as light as possible. We might want to erase this later. I'm just doing this by eye at the moment. But I want to do a rough border around there, giving it about 1/8 of an inch border all the way around. I want to see what that looks like. So I'm going to take my trusty X-Acto knife here and carefully make some cuts. And I'm not going to cut the back line. That's actually going to be my fold line. I'm going to cut these outside lines so that I can fold that triangle up. And you can use either your free hand or you can use a ruler as a guide. It might help you with the cut to be a little bit more precise. And like we said, be careful what you're using. I'll go ahead and take this off actually. So I'm using the cutting mat. All right. So yeah, make sure your surface is protected, and you don't want to cut too much, right? So in this case, I mean, you'll make mistakes. This is going to happen. In this part of the experimental process, and the Bristol is a little thick, so you're going to have to hold down pretty hard. In some cases, you might have to go more than once. If you're having trouble seeing the line, you can try to do it freehand. But again, you might have less control over it. I want to make sure you're going nice and slow. You don't go too fast. So we can check this. There's a little piece left over there. Just by pushing up from the bottom, we now have our first cut. And I'm not going to cut that third line because I want that to be the fold line in this case. So actually just by folding that up, you can start to see how this transformation could occur. And because the Bristol is a thicker paper, we can actually manipulate this fold and vary it, and it will actually hold that, which is nice. If we were just using the copy paper, it would just be too floppy, and it wouldn't really allow us to do that. So I'm going to continue to go around here and complete these cuts. This is going to take a little bit of patience on your part and precision to make sure that it's clean and not messy. You can rotate your paper like I am, just depending on what's most comfortable for you for cutting. And for using this utility knife, for using this X-Acto, as you can see, I'm just holding it like a pencil. And it has, again, you want to put your fingers here, you want to put as much pressure as possible on the knife as you're cutting through, but only as much as so that you have control over it. So in this case, I'm just doing a manual fold, and it's almost more of a peel at that point. But you could, if you wanted a more hard edge, you can use the edge of the roller to do that. Let's see how that looks on our next one. You might notice some extra little pieces here you can take off. I'm going to keep going around and complete our first rectangle here. But depending on what your geometry is, what your geometric pattern is, you're going to want to be cautious and think about what happens after you fold it. And that's why, like I said before, it might take a couple tries to really understand the material that you're working with, understand the geometry of what you're working with, and what does it mean, right, to do those things. So you can start to see this thing coming together already. You can be intentional, don't rush, and be careful when you're cutting. These type of cuts, you're not really going to be able to use scissors for, or you have to be creative. But these internal cuts, things like this, are best for an X-Acto type blade, because you can have as much control over it as your pencil or paintbrush. Okay, and then there's our first portion of this. As you can start to see, this is already creating a relatively interesting three-dimensional form, and then we kind of have a grid in the background. If we flip to the opposite side, it's arguably more interesting. We see those plane shadows, and the two planes kind of interacting with each other. Okay, well, I'm going to continue on here. I'm going to put it on pause and then keep working, and then I'll be back. Okay, so we are back and completed most of these cuts, and I've completed all of the full rectangles, and there's something that feels like I should stop here instead of completing the whole cutout. There's something nice about the white space here, about that negative space that is kind of left over as a result of this pattern, right? And what I've found interesting, and again, I encourage you to study different things and think about, what you yourself are possibly interested in exploring. Something that I find really interesting about this is the variety of openings and the type of the difference in the openness that you get in shadows and also in form. And the depth that occurs here between the kind of inferred grid and the planes that come off of it. All right, so I encourage each of you to create something of your own. Again, start with a pattern. Maybe start in your sketchbook, come up with some ideas. Maybe you sketch some patterns, test out some, maybe on different pieces of paper, some different studies. There's an earlier one. Again, do a couple different versions, see which one you like. And next, after designing your geometric pattern, right, transcribe it onto the sheet. Something like this one. And then start to cut it, start to fold it, start to manipulate it into a low relief sculpture. And from here, this will be where we will stop. So complete this for Thursday, and then we'll have another set of videos showing us our next steps. And when you're done, make sure that you photograph it, and also photograph your initial sketches so that we can see, again, the original sketch, show us the pattern on the Bristol before you cut it. Photograph that. And then show us afterwards. And then tell us about the whole process. And, you know, it could be helpful, you know, depending on your lighting, to potentially use a light source when you're photographing it. You know, this one is, you know, kind of coming across okay at the moment, but you could even use your phone to, again, create as a light source. This one isn't helping in our case, but depending on, again, the lighting in your space, you could potentially use your phone flashlight and use that as a light source to emphasize some of the light and shadow, some of the depth, and some of the different elements that you're trying to create here with your relief sculpture. Okay, so as always, let us know if you have any questions. Also, feel free to email over your composition before you start cutting it or while you're cutting it for feedback. And when you're done, upload the sketches, the photographs to the Turnitin link on Blackboard. All right, thanks everybody, and stay tuned for the next video.